everybody. We are live with our, week 3 recap of the 90 days through the Bible endeavor. We are joined tonight on the cast by Chris Pilcher. Chris, how are you tonight, my guy?
Doing good, man.
Yeah,
Doing
yeah,
good.
yeah.
Made it through that snowstorm.
we got
Survived.
we got snow. It snowed. It snowed.
Oh man, it snowed so much. So, as much as I didn't like it, I'm a little sad to see it melt away. It's like I feel like it was so traumatic. I went through so much to endure that I just want to enjoy it for a little bit longer now that the roads are clear and now it's gone. So I got a love-hate relationship with it.
That is something you'll never hear come from my mouth, right? Like, I'm sad because the snow melted. That will never come from my mouth. Like, I'm all about triggering global warming a little bit more so we don't have to worry about snow here. I remember when I was a kid, man, like, we used to, like, all I remember, like, from winter was just white. Now, like, where we
Really?
are here in Ohio, we maybe get, like, one or two snowfalls a year, right? And, like, the snow we've gotten so far, right? It's not snow, man. It's not snow, but like I mean, it is snow, but it's not. And like this like looking at how much snow we currently get compared to what I remember, like I mean,
What do
global
you remember
warming
that?
must be a thing. So like, how do we trigger it a little bit more? Like we're at that we're like at that spot where if we can trigger it just a little bit more,
I
I'm
see what you're
thinking,
saying.
yeah, yeah. So I'm thinking, right, like we'll send out like mass notification to every like citizen in Ohio, like just leave your car running all night for like a
Yeah,
month or two, and hopefully we won't have to worry about snow anymore. Yeah, that would be nice.
I got you, man. I'm gonna go out and get a big old diesel, and if it can make it warmer, I am all in on that camp,
Isn't
100%.
isn't there something about like some law in Cali where eventually like gas cars are going to be illegal? Is that a thing? Is that a real thing? As like someone who's from
that that
California,
that
is
is
that
a
a real
real
thing?
thing, dude.
Okay, well,
That actually
we
is a
need the
real thing.
opposite. We need the opposite. Like, we need to ban all cars except for diesel cars.
There you go.
Yeah.
Just burn the fossils, baby.
How
Kill that
how
ozone layer.
common are electric cars in Cali? Does like everybody have them, or is it like we made this law and like nobody really has electric cars? Like, where are things at?
So compared to here, compared to what is like Southern Ohio,
Yeah.
it is a world of difference. Pretty much every shopping center you're gonna go to, you're gonna see like charging stations.
Yeah.
They're all over the place, everywhere. Not just Tesla ones, but like other EV ones. And then they've got all these tax stuff for them. So they're way more set up for it. So yeah, you see way more, but there's plenty of people that have gas vehicles, and it's like I don't know how they're ever gonna end up enforcing it. I don't know. Who knows if it's ever gonna come to fruition? But they're trying. But I'm not there, bro. That's not my politics anymore. I'm out. I'm free from California
I
and
mean, you're
their
free. Like,
delicious rules.
what's your opinion on it, Chris? Like, talk to me
Mm.
about politics. Like, do we here in Ohio need to get rid of our gas cars?
Oh man.
I mean, we can move on if
Um,
you want. Like, I mean, we can talk about the Bible. You want to talk about the Bible?
let's, let's talk about the Bible.
Let's talk about the Bible. Let's talk about the Bible.
Let's talk
So,
about the
yeah, yeah,
Bible.
yeah. So we are. Shout out to Hannah in chat. She. We had a couple people hop into the 90 days through the Bible this past week. Hannah
Let's
being one of
go.
them. Shout out. Um, she says she is a day behind and will catch up tonight. I feel like I had a difficult week at staying caught up this week. I feel like I feel like I missed every other day, right? And then like every
Yeah.
other day I was like doubling up and doing two days
Yeah.
at once.
Same.
So I had a lot of that this week, so I spent most of my week behind. But it's all good. It's all good. Currently, we're
Yeah.
caught up. We are good. Chris, we covered a ton. Obviously, we covered a ton of stuff, but we moved through a significant amount of books this week, right? Like we read all of Joshua,
Cool books.
all of
Yeah.
Judges, yes.
Yeah.
We read all of Ruth.
Yep.
That book is so long, right? We read,
Huge.
yeah, it's huge. I think it's about as long as Psalms, right? It's close to about the same number of chapters. Close.
Give or
Uh,
take 140.
yeah. There we read through all of First Samuel, and we are currently halfway
Just started.
through Second Samuel. Maybe a little more than
Yeah.
halfway. I think we're close to around 20ish. But
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know about you, but like for me, moving into this week, right? Like I love the book of Joshua, and like Joshua
So good.
kind of like the beginning of it was good for me, and then like we got to the middle and it really started to drag. But dude, the book of Judges, right? Oh man, the book of Judges
That's a
hit hard for me.
storybook, bro.
Mm-hmm. I feel like I don't feel like the book of Judges has ever like I don't think it's ever hit me like it did this time, man. It hit me
Really?
good. It
Why is
hit me
that?
good.
Explain that.
So like I feel like right. I feel like when I have kind of like when you ask me about like the story of like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? Like I mean that's like Genesis, right? And then like the books that follow, it's a continuation of that story. And like when I consider that story, I've always kind of considered the book of Joshua as like the main event, you know? Like
Mm.
that's kind of how I've considered it, right? Because like it's all about this promise, and God leads the children of Israel out of Egypt, and like when He leads them out, it's like, oh, we're going to inherit the promised land, and they never do. And then like Joshua's the one that's like, okay, we're crossing the river and we're going into the promised land, and Joshua goes into the promised land. And like I feel like this time through, as like I've read through, and we hit the book of Joshua or we hit the book of Judges, I don't feel like the story concluded with Joshua. Like I've always seen Joshua as
Mm.
kind of like this is where like this phase of
That's
the
it.
story ends. But like I've
Yeah.
seen it just kind of flow this time, you know.
Yeah.
And like when you look at Josh or not Joshua, too many J's. When you look at Judges from a viewpoint of like the story is just flowing and going forward, bro, they're jacked up. Like they're so messed up. They're so messed up.
Yeah.
And I see so much of like the regular like the current church woven into the
Mm.
book of Judges, right? I don't know.
So what I find like interesting, and I don't know if I can just jump in right here,
Yeah.
like the school, but um, where we start this week's Bible plan in Joshua, we it is right. It's like a lot of people's favorite book because we see this like plan get in place. So we start up to this point. We see God has a people, and He makes promise with those people, and now they're in Egypt. So they're brought finally to like this conflict as a people. And then we get to watch as God leads them out and establishes them as a people on their own, not in Egypt or anything like that, not in captivity. Like they're an established people. They're like looking to, pave some paths. They've watched miraculous things take place in this exodus out of Egypt. They've seen seas been split open, water come out of a rock. They've seen all these miraculous things. They've got a leader, a top tier leader, right, in Moses, and they have accomplished so much, but they didn't fulfill their God given purpose. Like, well, they did by just being who they were, but like they never made it into this promised land. So we see a lot of the same things modeled in Joshua. Joshua is a Moses esque type leader, right? And we see as Joshua was a part of the spies that went in for Moses, and now he's doing the same thing with the spies this time, and it's a better result. And they're crossing seas, right? And they're treasuring the presence of God, and they're actually going in and taking like land. And it was like, this is great. This is this is what we hoped. Like I believe every um older generation, this is what they're like striving for, is to do that, to like pass the mantle and to watch the next generation seize the opportunity, right? To learn from the mistakes, to walk closer with God, to um, take full advantage of the provisions of God, right? Um, and so we get to see some of that, and we see as God is letting them take and possess, that He's got this strong. It's hyperbole because He says like destroy them all, but then at the same time, you see later, like there's still like these cities, and they're still inhabited with the same Canaanite people. So like, it's not actually destroyed all, but it was supposed to be like destroy every sense of that culture, destroy every sense of the, the Canaanites were so wicked, um, and they weren't just wicked against the children of Israel. This wasn't just an attack just on them. This was an attack on God. Their lifestyle was, and God was saying, "Hey, you're going to inhabit that land as a promise, but you're also my ambassador on this earth, and you're going to wipe out that culture, not a people, not a genocide of people. You're going to wipe out that culture." And that's what we're called to do. But the sad part of the story, as we end Joshua and go into Judges, Bradley, they got right in bed with them. They became just like them. They're
Mm-hmm.
identical to the culture that they're trying to cancel and destroy. They conform to, and then it's sad because we ended a book of one leader being so great and being the launching pad for the next leader to take the people into the promised land. And then it was like leader after leader. It was like it kept going downhill, man.
Let's
And I think that is why it's so significant. Judges really helping us realize the state of the children of Israel.
yeah, yeah.
And, go ahead.
What's the saying, right? Like what one generation tolerates, the next fully embraces,
Sure,
right?
sure.
Like there are little things that like we tolerate and we don't think it's a big deal, but as the narrative progresses, what one
Yeah,
tolerates, the next fully embraces. And
yeah,
I feel like you see that like all over scripture, right? When you look at the old, more so in the Old Testament, because in the Old Testament you see the progression of generations, and in the New Testament, I mean, like the New Testament's all basically just like one generation, right?
yeah,
So like you can see things in the Old Testament that you don't see in the New Testament, big time with the progression of generations, and like constantly, I feel like there's this like this notion of what one tolerates, the next fully embraces,
yeah,
and like there is a radical decline in the judges. Like you begin with Joshua and like it just goes downhill, and like
yeah.
maybe like that might not be fair to say because like even from like Moses to Joshua,
Hmm.
there was a decline. Like in the book of
Sure.
Joshua, something that like blows my mind, right?
Uh,
When Joshua basically takes over, like it talks about like I didn't realize this, I never caught this until like this read through in Joshua, right? It talks about
yeah,
how when Joshua like takes up the mantle and he becomes like the ruler over the people, it says that they begin again to circumcise
yeah,
themselves, right? And like I
yeah,
read that and like I think what, like you're telling me under Moses, this like very important thing woven into like the foundation of the law. They're like, yeah, no, we're not gonna do that no more. And it's not until Joshua comes along where they're like, okay, now we're gonna return to the Lord.
Yeah, yeah. And we see this over and over and over and over again in this Old Testament, where there's people who have these great encounters with God. They receive revelation, and this is bigger. This is bigger picture.
Yeah.
This is not just these stories in particular. They receive revelation and encounters with God, and they do good. They do good in a moment, and they see miraculous things happen. But one miraculous moment will not carry you through the battles that you have to conquer. And I think that is a if there is a lesson to learn through, especially through like going through from Moses to Joshua, and then especially in Judges, um, miraculous moments cannot carry you through your walk with God.
Mm-mm.
You know that like it will not sustain the walk. It will not sustain the day to day. And we found that out really strong in this week's Bible reading plan. Honestly, I really feel that way.
The ideal that one moment will not sustain you. This is like we're leaping from like where we started with this, right? Where I'm going to leap all the way to the end of where our reading ended this week, right?
Sure.
Like in today's reading, I mean like we've made it all the way to like from like Joshua to David, right? Like we started
Yeah.
at Joshua. We
Sure.
went through Joshua's story. Joshua dies. The judges come into play. The we see the cycle of the judges. And like the book of Judges ends with like the final verse. Like what does it say? It's like there was no judge in that day, and like the people
Mhm.
did what they thought was like right in their own eyes,
In their
right?
own eyes. Yeah.
And that's kind of like alluding to what's coming, right? Because the progression of
Sure.
the narrative moves from like Judges to First Samuel, and in First
Mhm.
Samuel we see the rise of Samuel the prophet, and the rise of the first king Saul, and then eventually the second king David, and like that in itself is a massive narrative that I'm sure we'll explore. But once we get into the narrative of David, right, like David starts as like this, like we're introduced to this like shepherd boy that wasn't even initially considered, right?
Yeah.
And the one that wasn't even initially considered is the one that is anointed to be king, right? He's anointed like Samuel like declares prophetically like David like you're going to be king, and like before like anything ever happens, right? Before anything ever happens, we read where like he's like it's like declared like you're going to be king. He's still this shepherd boy, and then he finds himself on the front line of the battlefield. Goliath is there, and this mere little shepherd boy kills Goliath, right? And like when we talk about the story Goliath, like we understand like this big scary giant, but I don't know if like we really like consider the fullness of that narrative, right? Like when you break things down, like I feel like you do Goliath injustice when you're just like, he's a giant. No, he's a
Yeah.
Nephilim, right? He
Yeah.
is the descendant he is the offspring of a fallen angel and a human, right? Like, I mean, this guy's like half angelic, you know? Like, this is like a big deal. Like, David encounters this Nephilim and kills him, and like he has this incredible encounter with God. Like God does this incredible things, and there are so many incredible things that God does through his journey. But where we ended the narrative of David, he's become king. Like he's king um, at the end of today's reading. And not only is he king, but he's doing some pretty messed up things, right? Like
Sure.
he sees Bathsheba on the rooftop. We know the
Yeah.
narrative there. He falls to sin, and then he goes out of his way to conceal his sin, to hide
Covered
his
up, yeah.
sin. And first he has Bathsheba's husband come home, tries to trick him into laying with her. He doesn't. He refuses. He's like, I'm not going to do that. Well, my guys are out on the front line, you know. And then David's like, okay, you suit yourself. And David sends him to the front line. Basically, he has the guy murdered. Like, this is
Yep.
the same guy that God's like, you're my guy. This is the
Yeah.
same guy that
Crazy.
a sling and a stone killed a half angel,
Yeah.
right? Like, you may like we like there may be moments in our life where we encounter God and we see God do incredible things, but if we allow the small things in our lives, if we give way for those things to come in, they'll ruin us.
I just had a thought. I know we're gonna probably next week is probably gonna be all David, in our recap, I'm sure. Just knowing obviously the plan and where we're going. But I would just thought it just hit me the children of Israel when they have Saul step in and we see how Saul is not the leader that they need, right? They're just like, we need a king. We don't want these judges anymore. We don't want this like up the air. Give us a king. They get a king. He's not what they want. But they see this shepherd boy who is more like judge-esque, right? Like because he came out of the stable, he came slaying this half angelic being, it was more like Samson-esque, right? Like this kid, um I don't know, we would probably call him like a gifted one, like a prodigy or something, you know what I mean? Like some type of like I'm sure like some type of like label. And here he is stepping in now, and you hear the songs where they sing like, how many people Saul could kill, but how many David, and like there's it's almost like a folk legend, right? That's just the way my mind works, right? So I'm trying to think about like the people. David steps in, then David falls, and I bet you the people of Israel were like, "Oh no, like our captors are coming now, right? Like this is it. Homeboy fell. We're about to fall apart as a nation again. Everything that he's been doing, like, it's all for nothing. But like, there is such a turnaround in like that story, for his heart. Um, and obviously, there's more reading that we need to get to, and we may be jumping ahead. But I just think about that, like, after everything that they've went through, we see the children of Israel. They are like they always revert back. It seems like so quickly. They're so quick to just go back. And I can't blame them because we're the same way, you know? I mean, we really are. We don't want to admit that, but we are. But they like probably are thinking, man, this David guy, he's about to land us in captivity, or he's about to land us in a hard, we're about to get punished by God for something. But this David guy was different in his heart after God. I think that's so important. And this isn't, I guess, just to say, if we look at what we've read in the last 7 days, let's glean some of that from this. Let's really look at the story, because this is the shape of the tree, right? This is not studying the leaves. This is getting the idea. Looking back at what we've read the last 7 days, we should be able to see a couple themes. And I think one of them should be really setting the stage for the difficult road that David had, as a king to be sold out after God, to love the presence of God, and to worship God the way he did after probably the negative feedback he was getting from all of the people. You know what I'm saying? The distrust that they probably had, and yeah, he had victories, but at the same time, the mistrust that has been years in the making, and several leaders before him falling and failing and never recovering, and what he had to overcome because he had this love of God, but what he had to overcome to be able to lead this nation into worshiping God and not reverting just into straight pagan worship, sacrificing children, all kind of like sexual immorality. And I just think that is, truly a lesson that we can learn from this last 7 days of reading.
You know, when as I have I've spent like most of my time, like when I consider the reading that we've gone through this past week, like for
Uh-huh.
me, like my mind is just like wrapped up in Judges, right? And like when I
Sure.
look at the book of Judges, right? Like I'm really challenged by like everything you said right there, because like when I look at the book of Judges, I'm like, man, these guys are bad, right? Like these
Yeah.
guys
Yeah.
are depraved. These guys are
Yeah.
like they messed up, right? These guys messed up and made a mess of things, and then like fast forward to David, right? Like he's this guy after the heart of God. He's this guy that's like pure and humble, right? Like Saul chases him into the wilderness, and like
Yeah.
David has opportunity to kill Saul, and he doesn't. Like he
Yeah.
has opportunity to kill Saul,
Yeah.
and he doesn't. And then when
Yeah.
Saul dies, David is grieved. David
Yeah.
mourns the death of Saul, right? Like he is this
Yeah.
guy with this humble heart, this guy with this humble heart, and like pure in the eyes of God, favored and blessed by God. And then he messes up, right? Like he messes
Mhm.
up, and like I imagine like all of the people who saw him, like those who knew. I mean, David went out of his way to cover his tracks. He went out of his way
Sure.
to hide his sin. But there are people who knew, right? Like imagine being those people and what they thought. Like the mentality is, this guy's no different than Saul. This guy's no different than the judges
Yeah.
before the kings. Like
Yeah.
no different at all. But like, what's God's response? Does God say,
Yeah.
David, you messed up, I'm removing you from king? Right? Like think about like all the judges, even in the mix of their sin. Even in the
Mhm.
mix of their sin. Like God wasn't like, I'm gonna burn you with fire, you know?
Yeah.
How many times have we seen somebody fall, and like our mentality is like, this guy's no different than Saul. This guy's no different than the judges before.
Mhm.
And the
Yeah.
whole time
Sure.
God's saying, nah, 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 this is my guy.
Wow.
How many people are there, right? Like just hypothetically speaking, like how many people are there that pursued God, right? They were pursuing God, and then they sinned, they messed up, and as they messed up, the people that are supposed to be a reflection of God cast them aside.
Oh man, way too often.
What if
Way too often.
what if when our brother fell, we were there with a hand stretched out to pick him up from the ground?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
It's interesting, man. And I mean, I know the story. This 7 day reading period that we just completed, I feel like it's so relatable, especially once you get out of like Leviticus, Numbers, right? Get back into stories. I'm a story guy, right? So Um, it's so cool, and I know I'm kind of jumping off a little bit here, but what I think is so interesting is in the middle of we keep referencing Joshua and Judges, the bulk of our reading last 7 days. Middle of this is, or sorry, and then we have First Samuel. Right after Judges, we've got these what 3 chapters? Ruth is 3 chapters,
I thought it was
four
like
chapters.
hundred and
Ruth
like
is four.
27 or something.
4 chapters. It's only 146 less than Psalms. So, um, the 4 chapters in Ruth, and I don't know. Could you kind of run us through Ruth, because I know you probably are thinking the same thing as me, and I'd like to make a comment on it because I think it's so interesting. It seems like it kind of interrupts. It stays with the story. It's like still telling a story. It's not back to laws and regulations. It's still telling a story, but it's like an interesting story to kind of almost interrupt 4 chapters. It seems like to interrupt the story, but it doesn't. It's pretty cool.
So the book of Ruth, right? So when you look at the progression of the Bible, right? Like like you have Genesis and Exodus, and they're like a continuation, like an ongoing story, right? You got Genesis
Yeah,
and Exodus, and then Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Um, like it's all a flowing story, right?
yeah,
Leviticus like isn't necessarily like part of the flowing
mm,
story. It's like the law that was given to Moses on Mount Sinai,
yeah,
and so like it's like thrown in there. It's not necessarily part of like the ongoing flowing narrative, but like it is, right? Like it's just like
sure. Same
cornerstone of
time.
their belief. And then when we get to like Joshua, like it's the continuation of the story, right? And then Judges is a
Yeah,
continuation of that story. And then, like you
yeah,
mentioned, there's this random book of Ruth, right? Like Ruth is thrown in there, and then when we get to First Samuel, basically picks up where Judges left off. So like Ruth kind of is this like oddball book, and like it
yeah,
is a total break in the pattern of the progression of the books that we've seen. Um, Timeline wise, it basically like I'm not exactly sure the exact like time frame of where it would slide in, but technically it would be somewheres. The narrative of it would be somewheres in the book of Judges. I believe it's like the first verse or something. Like in chapter one, it opens up and basically says like I think it's like in the time of the judges or something. I think that's how it opens. Let me see.
yeah. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a
Yeah.
famine in the land.
Yeah. So we know it's slides in somewheres in the mix of the Book of Judges. Um, it is definitely a book that is a like a huge foreshadowing of Jesus, right? Like when I read the book of Ruth, right? Like Boaz is this like Jesus figure, right? And like predominantly the book is about the story of like Ruth and Naomi and Boaz. They're in like a strange land. Ruth's husband dies. They end up going back to like where the people of Israel are, and they're kind of like outcasts to society. And Boaz is this guy that has the power to basically give them seat and position within the community. But part of that is like Ruth has to find a husband, and like there's some guy, and like he's like a potential like candidate, and he's like, yeah, no, I'm good. And then Boaz is like, I got you, boo. And like Boaz ends up taking Ruth to be his wife. And yeah, he's a kinsman redeemer, this Jesus figure that takes the outcast, brings them in. Um, yeah, and eventually also kind of how it fits into everything. Not only is it this narrative that slides in like somewhere in the mix of the Book of Judges, um, but additionally, it is from their offspring that
Yeah.
David eventually comes. So like David in the lineage of things comes from that family line. So
Yeah. I think it is, first off, super refreshing to read that short story after reading Judges, because it is like you lose hope. You're pulling your hair out because you're like, come
you
on,
go from
guys, get it
blood and
together.
gore, like constant blood and gore, to this like love story.
Love story, Seriously, it's like if you this is how I imagine it. So Brooklyn and I feel like we used to be more on the same page of like watching like movies when we were in like high school. And I think it was because we could care less. We just wanted to sit on the couch together, right? Now it's like if we actually do get to sit down for a moment to unwind, it's not often we're gonna get to do this. And it's like I want to watch something like I love, believe it or not, I love like westerns. I love like old cowboy, like the older the better. I don't like the newer ones. I like not even the 70s. They're too old. Not even Clint Eastwood, but the old ones, the old ones, or like the spaghetti westerns. I know it's super random. I like westerns. Brooklyn cannot stand westerns. She cannot. She can't stand it. Hates it. Now she will watch girly movies all day long. She loves it. She loves like a good, story like that. And I was watching one day, I can't think of the name of it, but it was like a battle movie. It was like a war movie. People are getting blown up, grenades are going off. People are losing arms and legs and screaming. And as soon as we end, Brooklyn, like as soon as the movie ended, because I was watching something first, she sits down. She's like, "Okay, let's put something on." I said, "What do you want to watch? Preferably action." She picks out Kung Fu Panda. Kung Fu Panda, bro. I'm like, this has nothing. No, this is not on the same level of. I think it was Saving Private Ryan, right? I love that movie. So it was like, it's not on the same level, okay? Of like Kung Fu Panda and Saving Private Ryan. These are two different things here, right? And that's how I think of when I go from Judges to Ruth. Like, we were in a stinking battle story, and we're learning about how brutish, this time was. And during the same time, because it says clearly in the days of the judges, at the same time that we think everyone's just getting wrecked by one another, you got a love story going on out in the field. And so I'm like, all right, that's cool in and of itself. I needed a break, because sometimes you watch something that's like too much, and you're like, okay, I need a break. So we got a break, a little breather, and it establishes hope. It establishes hope, and it was just like you said, and you took a lot of my points, so I shouldn't have let you explain, because it is such a type of Christ, and people, when they read the Bible, they think Jesus was introduced in the New Testament. He was introduced so much earlier. And we see the different ways that God is showing us how he is going to introduce his son and the characteristics his son is going to have. And we get to partake in this experience and really learn, so that when we do see like the manifestation of a physical body Jesus in the Gospels, we already know what he's like, because we've seen characteristics throughout the Old Testament. And Ruth is such a beautiful story to show us that. And it's so impactful that the people mentioned here in Ruth are mentioned New Testament. They make it in there as the grandmother or so to David. And the lineage continues on from David all the way to Jesus. And it's so impactful that while there was a plan for judges, for man to have power and to use brute strength like Samson, and to have abilities in war and in tactic. Now that was a plan. However, during the same time period, there was also a plan set in motion, and it came through a humble woman who was in this story, and she eventually leads to the lineage of David, which leads to the is part of the lineage of Christ. And I think it's beautiful. Um, I want to be careful when I'm saying all this, because then you turn the page over. At least in my Bible, I got my Jimmy Swaggart signed Bible here. But you turn the page over one page from Ruth chapter 4 into Samuel 1, and Samuel 1 and 2, and we pick up the story with Hannah, a praying woman who prayed and travailed, you know? So I think it's so impactful that we see that though God had a plan and though God was using man to bring forth and execute, right, to wipe out this culture, he also had a plan to bring it through in another way. And it took years and years and years. But there was birthed one named Jesus who destroyed sin. And he's destroyed it forever. And he's given us the power to walk in it. And so that plan is being carried out. It's the long plan, man. It's not the short solution. And I just think that is so cool. I always took Ruth for granted. And so that revelation hit me. And I'm like, man, that's cool that God just put it right there. He's such a good author. Such a good author.
You know,
What do you got going on? I saw you pick out a Bible here. What's going on?
so I got this like Bible here, right? I have basically like an absurd amount of notes in it, right?
Okay.
I'm basically careless with this Bible, right? And that's probably not the best way to say it. I just got a lot of like
Sure.
wild notes in it. In the book of Judges, I wrote above it Saving Private Ryan, and then above Ruth, I wrote Kung Fu Panda.
No way.
Yeah, I feel really bad for Brooklyn. Like you make her watch westerns,
Dude.
bro.
I I don't
Bro,
know why I cannot
what's your
tell you why
favorite
I liked
movie?
it.
What's your favorite movie? This is probably gonna like it's probably gonna be an absurd answer, right? You love westerns, and what's your favorite movie?
Okay. If Zach Ruth is watching this, he would be able to tell you. I've told everyone this. Hands down, my favorite movie is Inception. Okay, it took Brooklyn 30 attempts to figure out what Inception was all about. Like, she was so confused. The
I
whole
don't know
time,
if
she's
I've
like,
ever seen it. What's it about?
really?
I don't think I've ever seen it.
Oh,
Maybe I have.
brother.
Let me Google it real quick. Let me Google it real quick.
It's Leonardo DiCaprio, and without giving too much away, they
Yeah, I don't
have
think I've seen this.
they have they have a method that they can sedate people, get into their subconscious through dreams, and try to plant ideas or extract ideas. And I'm telling you, bro, it's a good
I'll
movie,
have to check
but
it
it's
out.
so confusing. Brooklyn could not figure it out for the longest time. Other than that, next favorite movie would have to be um, My Name Is Nobody. It
My
is a
name is nobody.
spaghetti western. It is an Italian western movie.
I
It's
don't know
so
what to
good.
say, man. I don't know what to say.
Henry
Zach
Fonda,
Ruth,
Terrence Hill.
Zach
It's
Ruth,
excellent.
and Tristan asked me my favorite movie, and my
Yeah,
answer led to me being insulted
I'm
and
sure.
basically them being in disbelief. Right? They're like, "That's not your favorite movie. What's
What
really
is
your
it? What is
favorite
it?
movie?"
What
It's
is
not
it?
even close for me. It's not even close for me. There's no movie that's even a close second.
What?
The Greatest Showman.
I've never watched it.
You've never watched it? It's great.
Hey,
It's
you
great.
you never watched Inception?
Okay. I'll watch Inception. You watch The Greatest Showman, right?
But it has like singing in it.
It does have singing in it, but it's not a musical, right? Like there is
And
singing in it.
it has like Hugh Jackman in it, right?
Yeah, it's got Hugh Jackman in it. Wolverine's in it. Wolverine's in it.
I can't see them do
Just
Wolverine
just
like that.
just don't
Took his
don't
claws, took his manhood, made him sing.
don't just watch it. Trust me. Just watch it, right? Like
Uh,
listen, like you can like pull like multiple sermons from it. It's great. It's great.
multiple times.
Yeah, it's a wholesome show that will really speak to your spirit, right? And like I think the reason why it resonates with me so much, like I think I'm a dreamer, and like I
Okay.
think it really has a way of like speaking to dreamers, man. So you should watch
Okay.
it. You
Okay.
should watch it. It's good.
I'll try. All right.
It's good. It's
Put it
good.
on my list. Zach has given me a list of movies I have to
No,
watch.
no,
We
no,
just
no.
never get to watch them.
Zach is dumb. Zach is dumb. Move The Greatest Showman above every movie that Zach told you to watch.
I'm gonna ask him
Yeah, you
his
ask him.
thoughts.
You ask him. No, don't ask him his thoughts. Don't ask him his thoughts. You won't. You won't want to hear what he has to say.
That's
Um.
awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
But man, the Bible,
So good.
bro. There is in the mix of all of this that we've been discussing, like so much good stuff. There is. I feel like there's a narrative in the mix of all this that is kind of just hidden away in everything, and like when you look at like the major details, like it's something that I feel like is something that very easily slips in mind. You could like really like read over it and not think a lot about it, but like the story where like David's talking with who is it, the prophet Nathan,
Mhm.
and like he says to Nathan, like he says to this prophet, yo, dude, I want to build a temple. I want to build a temple for God, right? Like I got this
Yeah.
palace and like the Ark of the Covenant's in this tent. Like how can I be in this palace and the Ark
Mhm.
be in this tent? I'm going to build a temple. And Nathan's like, "Yeah, man, that's a good idea. Go and do that. Like everything that's on your heart with this, go and do it, right? Like this prophet of God, his response to hearing David say like, "Yo, I want to do this." It's like, "Go." And then like Nathan leaves David, and when he goes to sleep he has a dream, and God comes to Nathan in the dream and basically like, yeah, nah, we're not doing that. And like Nathan then goes to David and he's like, yo man,
You can't do it.
like
Yeah.
no, it's not for you to do. Eventually he's like, yo, you're like, your son will come and like your son will build it, but like this is not for you to do. And like I'm fascinated by this story for a couple of reasons. One, I think like we are really good at, I'd probably say like we are really good, like that's, we are really bad. We are really bad at like people like how do I say this? How do I say what I want to say? Like there are so many people, not everybody's like this, right? Maybe not everybody, I don't know. I feel like I'm like this, right? Maybe I'll just speak from like my experience, right? Like I see something that needs done, and like I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. There's something that needs done, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna take all the
Sure.
weight, put it on my shoulders, and I'm gonna do it. And like a lesson that God has had to teach me over and over and over again, because He teaches me and then I forget. And He's like, "Yeah, man, I had to teach it to you again." And like we just have this cycle. Me and God, we have this cycle of this where God's like, "Yo, Brad, like you have a calling to do something, but your calling's not to do everything."
Yeah.
The realization that like I have a call to do something, not a call to do everything, is something that like we need to realize, you know. And like another like when I think about this and like I consider this, another story that comes to mind is I don't remember if we talked about it on the show or not, but this goes back to the book of Exodus, right? I believe is in the book of Exodus, might have been in the book of Leviticus. I don't remember. It all kinds of runs together. But like when God is giving Moses the instructions on how
Hmm.
to build the pyramid, or not the pyramid, The
The pyramid.
we could have a discussion about that. Who built the pyramids? Um,
Ah!
anyways, with God's giving Moses, was it Moses? Yeah, it was Moses. God was giving
Ah!
Moses the instructions on how to build the temple, and like he gives him the instructions, but he's like, "You're not gonna do it, right?" He's like, "This
Yeah,
other guy, I'm filled with my spirit, and he will do it." So like
yeah,
God gives Moses the instructions on how to do it, but Moses doesn't do it. This other guy does it, and it even says that God filled this guy with the Holy Spirit to do it. And like this is Old Testament, right?
yeah,
It says that the man is filled with the Holy Spirit to do it. Like it uses New Testament language, right? In a
yeah,
time when the Holy Spirit just came down and rested on people. No, this guy who was anointed to build the temple, the Spirit resided in him, and he
yeah.
did it. You know, like Moses in that moment didn't have a calling to do everything, and God went above and beyond to empower
Straight
this
up.
random guy in a way beyond how he normally dealt with people in that time to carry out the task. And then here's David wants to do this good thing for God, and God's like, no. And then like think about on the Mount of Transfiguration, right? Like the disciples that are up there and they see like Jesus, and who was it that was up there on the Mount of Transfiguration? Was it like Moses and Elijah? I think maybe. I don't know. It might have been Moses, Elijah. If not, like forgive me. It's been a while since I've read the
Abraham.
story. Maybe I don't know. Like two of the Old Testament guys, like they're like there in the moment of the
Yeah,
Transfiguration, and like the disciples who were there were like, when it was all done, they're like, Jesus, let us build three temples on this mountain for you and them. Like I read that, I'm like,
yeah,
yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah, 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 right. But no, like if insert Nathan, right? Like remove Jesus from like Mount of Transfiguration. Say like Jesus went off and was like doing something else, and like the two disciples were left with Nathan the prophet, and like the two disciples looked to Nathan the prophet like, "Yo, we should build three temples." Nathan would be like, "Yeah, do that." You know, like that's basically like what he does with David. And then like when they slow down to actually hear from God, sometimes there are moments in our life where there will be a good thing in front of us that we could do, but that good thing may not necessarily be the God thing. And like
do you think?
where that kind of like brings me into is, think about this, right? Nathan's a prophet, right? Like
Yeah,
like Nathan is this prophet, and the initial counsel from the man of God, the initial counsel from the prophet was go,
yeah,
when God's counsel was stay.
yeah.
And like I am reminded that my counsel is not God's counsel.
Mm,
How many times do we speak on a matter without saying, okay, God, what are you saying?
yeah,
What if Nathan, when David asked him in that moment, what if he was like, I don't know, let's see what God says? Like his response wasn't, let's see what God says. It was, yeah, go. And then God had to come to Nathan in a dream, like, yo, this is what's up. You know, I think sometimes like this is kind of like going out left field, right? Um, I think sometimes the reason why God has to speak to us in dreams sometimes is because we wouldn't listen to what he was saying in the first
mm,
place.
sure.
Like it's like, let me have your attention, please. I don't
That's true. We're going back to Inception now.
know. Is it like heavy dreams, right? Like, am I going to like watch Inception and just like understanding spiritual dreams is just going to be unveiled to me?
You're gonna understand them all. You're gonna understand that one sheep was standing above the other sheep, and you're gonna understand. You're gonna be able to interpret so many dreams after you watch Inception.
So you're saying
Incredible.
like don't waste my money on buying a dream interpretation, but go watch Inception.
That's right. That's right. This has just Venmo me for the suggestion. Um, I probably don't have time to get into it because it's already 10, but I mean, and this probably will lead us into like next week because I'm sure we'll be all over David. But what you're saying with him wanting to build the temple, one of the most impactful of scriptures to me, or just stories, is God basically responded back and said, "Who put this idea in your mind? Who gave you this idea? Because it wasn't me." And you can interpret it two ways. The way I interpret it is like, wait a second. Every you have Abraham who was bringing sacrifice, right, before God. That was his idea. Like his idea to serve God before it was cool, kind of thing, almost. Um, from that point, you see that like these men would have encounters with God, and He would give them commands, and He would give them instructions on how to do things, and how to please Him, and how to keep Him happy. And they would have offerings, and they would have sacrifices because they screwed up, and they're trying to keep God happy. They're just trying to, just not to please Him, but like to just make up for what has happened, to make sure He's not angry. And then David gets this radical idea. Of course he would. That says, God, has anyone ever done anything for you? You know, it'd almost feel like the guy that you know, is always giving and is generous. And I was like, wait a second. Has anyone ever thrown you a party before? You know what I mean? Has anyone ever made you a cake? And David has this radical idea, said, let me make you a cake. Let me give you something better than what I have. Not because you're mad at me, just because I like you a lot, you know? And like I picture it as God saying, who gave you, where did you come up with this idea? No one's ever wanted it. Like spoil me. I mean, and I seriously, like, God knows my heart. I say this with all honor and reverence. The way I imagine like an emotion, because God is an emotional God, is almost like blushing. Like, for me? You want to do that for me? Hold on now. Like, and I think that could be part of the reason why right away he didn't just speak to Nathan and say, no, don't tell him, tell him no, tell him not to do this. I think God would, not that he was caught off guard, taken aback, but almost like, wait a second, he wants to do that for me. The people I made. It was like, like you have a kid, and I don't have any kids, but like I know the times that I would go to my dad and I would do something special for him, not because I was in trouble or not because it was Father's Day. I just because like I loved him. Those were the moments that really made the difference. And it was like that's how I imagined him as a father receiving that sentiment. And he didn't let him. But you look at Psalms, and now we're jumping way ahead. Psalms 27, David says, there's one thing that I've desired. This is David, old man David, looking back on his life. He's looking at an account and basically making an account of his life. He said, basically, all the years, there's one thing that I've desired, that thing that I've sought, that I could dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to inquire of his beauty, to behold his beauty, and inquire in his temple. And like that's all David wanted to do was just sit in that temple with him. And David is like looking back, like, yep, God never let me do it, but God, that's all I wanted to do. Not like a bargaining chip with God, but like that is baller, dude. To be able to say, like, God, I had an original idea how I wanted to spoil you, and you didn't let me do it, but I promise if you let me do it, I'd do it. And he had the restraint to not do it. You know, that's how much he respected God and would listen. And it's just, dude, we get to end this week's reading on that and then go into some more stuff. And then there's more ups and downs in the reading that we're gonna read, sure. But there's so much to glean from, guys, on what we have read. So much. So that just wrecks me every time.
Very beautifully said, man. Like we may have did David a little dirty this week, right? Talking about like some of his sins, like putting them on display. But man, like you did a really good job at capturing his heart there, right? Like I mean, he had his sins, he had his downfalls, but in the mix of it all, like what's the scripture say? He was a man after God's own heart. And like
Yeah.
think about like the story where they're bringing like when I think about David, like the story where they're bringing the ark back into the city always comes to mind, right?
Yeah.
Like he takes a couple steps, they all stop and they all like start celebrating and dancing and praising God, and like basically like David's like radical about it, strips down naked and he's like dancing in the streets. Like I don't know, man. And, like his wife looks at him and like she like despises him in the mix of it. And he doesn't even care. He's like, yeah, this is like this for God, you know.
Yeah.
Like there are scriptures that talk about how like various people they're described as a friend of God, right? And like we read stories of like Enoch where like Enoch literally walked
Yeah.
with God and God took him. And then like we see David, right? Like I think David like we don't get a lot of insight into the story of Enoch, right? Like we don't get a lot of insight into this character of
No.
Enoch. There's no development of it. Like it's just he walked with
No.
God and then God took him,
Yeah. It
right?
was.
Like I can't help but wonder, right? Like if we see David and David's like radical about God in this fashion, what was Enoch like?
Yeah.
You know, like
Bro.
and what about us? Like I would challenge everyone watching right now. Like consider this. Like how have you treated God? Like do you treat God like a person? Like there I think so many people who like profess to be Christians, like God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, it's this conceptual ideal and very few people move from God being an ideal to God is an actual person. He is my friend and I am going to love and adore him. I would challenge everyone watching, love and adore him as if he is a
Yeah.
friend standing right there
Yeah.
with you.
Yeah.
And on that note, we are going to wrap up for this week. We'll be back next Monday, probably around like 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock. I don't know. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out, but we'll be there
Yeah.
next Monday. And if you are not a part of the reading and you would like to be a part of the reading, we'll put the link down below. We'll put the link down below. It'll be a link, and you click it, and it will throw you into our YouVersion group. We're super far into the Bible right now. Like we're halfway through the book of Second Samuel. So if you do want to hop in, I would encourage you just pick right up where we are and
Yeah.
plow on with us. Like I would not advise you to go back and start from the beginning. That's a lot. I would not advise it. Just pick up, grind it out with us.
Yeah.
There's a lot to glean. But yeah, you all have a good week. Peace.